when we talk about natural wine, we talk about conventional wine. It's like we're talking about like two areas of wine that are at war with each other. And philosophically, they're the opposite ends of the spectrum. But surely wine should be sort of like a unifying thing. It shouldn't be like, we shouldn't talk about the politics as if they're different. Wine should always be helping people to come together rather than pushing them apart. There's a natural wine for every single taste, whether you're super conventional to out and out crazy funky. It's true. It's like you can match the wines with strong personalities to people with their personalities. Well, there's a big argument, and it's not clear, about sulfites. I believe that they're present in such small quantities that people who complain about allergenic reactions to wine, I don't think it is the sulfite, but I think it's the combination of sulfur with 50 unknown ingredients, additives.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to No Sediment Wine Podcast. Today, my guest, or actually we are the guest of Doug Wregg, who is the co-organizer of the Real Wine Fair. Maybe before we start, you can tell us about your wine journey and about yourself and how you got into the wine.
Well, from the very beginning? That's a long story. We may be here for some days, but I'll try to condense it. Okay. So, my love of wine started very late in life after university. And I can remember the first great bottle of wine I ever experienced, but I didn't know it was great. I just knew there was something different. It wasn't just a beverage like lemonade or Coca-Cola. It was like, I'm drinking something called wine and it's blowing my mind. But it was a very atypical experience because I had it on an island in the Outer Hebrides off the coast of Scotland. It was midnight and there were shooting stars in the sky, a full moon. I was surrounded by mountains and the ocean, and I was drinking from the bottle, and it was a fourth growth Bordeaux, Chateau Tolbeau, and I saw shooting stars, metaphorically as well as in reality, and I thought, this is amazing. Like, what is this, and what am I tasting? But because I wasn't professional, you don't investigate your taste. You work entirely on your sense of instinct and feeling. So I knew that there was something amazing about wine potentially, but I didn't know anything about wine. A few years later, I worked in a family restaurant and I was given responsibility for the wine list. And I didn't have time to do the sort of classic wine courses. So I had to read books and teach myself and have mentors who told me what I should be looking for in wines. And bit by bit, I developed my own sort of sense of taste and appreciation for certain wine styles. And my tastes have changed enormously. So I really liked obvious, sweet, oaky, quite confected wines, if I'm honest, because I could recognize them. There was something like obvious enough about them to appeal to me. I didn't have sophisticated taste particularly, but I actually quite liked expensive wines as well. Maybe because they were expensive. I don't know. I wasn't discerning enough. And then over the years, I think my palate became different. Like, everyone's palate, whether it's for food or wine, changes. Like, I started like salty things, like anchovies and olives, and I like salty wines, which are wines which had less so. And then I was in Paris, 2004 or 5 with a colleague, and we went to a natural wine bar. I've never heard of the term natural wine at all. This woman, it was a tiny little, I think it had like 3 tables, and there's a list of 400 wines, and I looked at it, and my colleague knew more about it than I do, but the owner, she said, I'll choose the wines for you. And she opened a bottle and put it on the table and poured us 2 glasses, and I put the wine in my mouth, and my head exploded. I'd never tasted anything like this, because like wine, I was used to being in blocks of flavor that I could describe, but this wine moved across my palate and touched my whole palate at the same time. So it seemed to be living and changing. It was just fascinating, and I didn't even know whether I liked it or not. The flavors were so strange, but I couldn't pin them down either. So this was like a dynamic wine, and it was a biodynamic wine as it turned out. No sulfites, and I didn't know you could make wine without sulfites. And then, like, having absorbed this wine, then she opened another bottle of wine, and it was sort of similar. It had the same sort of like wonderful weirdness to it. And I think I could almost sense my palate reconfiguring, like changing almost moment by moment, every swirl in my mouth. And what was just so amazed was that I wasn't drinking one glass of wine. I was drinking 6 or 10 glasses of wine. As the wine was evolving, and my opinions about it were evolving. But at that point, I recognized there was this thing called natural wine, low intervention wine, which was of a different species to the sort of more classic or conventional wines that I was brought up on. And thereafter, it was a bit of a revelation. I had a discussion with my colleague Eric one year, and I said, should we have a wine bar, like they do in Paris, but have our favorite wines, the wines that we would drink. We don't know if anyone else would drink them, but we'll drink them, and let's just share them with friends and whoever wants to come. And lo and behold, in 2008, Terroir, which is probably a seminal moment, a seminal opening in terms of the natural wine scene in London, it opened and became almost an overnight success and really changed the debate, because a lot of people who were sort of innocents about it, about natural wine, became enormously attracted to it. A lot of people who didn't like the idea became enormously opposed to it. So it became the hot topic for discussion for the next probably 7 to 8 years. But in the meantime, I think my palate was becoming more and more so. And it's still evolving. I mean, I find that the sort of wines that I like, they're getting decreased rather than increased. There are more good wines out there than ever. But what I like drinking, I'm becoming more stylized, and I guess if I describe it, I like less is more. Less flavor, less fruit, less anything, more minerality, more salinity, more sense of purity, more energy. All these are like not real wine terms, but for me they are. Like, they're what makes the wine alive as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you must have had an open mind when you started to taste these wines and you fell in love with them, because there are so many people who taste first, I think there are extremes. Some taste first the natural wines, and no, that's not my style. And I just wonder that you were tasting them with open mind and you fell in love with them. Is that the correct way to put it?
I think so. I mean, I liken it to, I once went to a restaurant. I mean, I had very conservative food taste, I would never have shellfish, for example. One day, my family took me to a Chinese restaurant in Victoria, and they ordered lobster. And I thought, nah, way am I going to have anything like that? Just I just hated the idea of it. And they said, go on and try it. I said, no. And then go on, a little bit, tried it. And I thought, oh, I'm in heaven. They heard the sounds of, heavenly trumpets and angels, whatever. I said, I want more. They said, no, we finished it now. And then I thought, because I went to university and studied English, and if you do that, the courses teach you to be really open-minded about text, to see all sides of the text, but also to read lots of criticism, and then to synthesize your opinion on the basis of the text and also criticism. So I think being open-minded, quite sort of liberal sort of personality, I think I was very open to the idea of taste, particularly at that point in my life, which is, let's say, early 2000s. And I guess also, if you're really jaded sometimes by wine, and I go through periods where my palate's really bored and tired, and I just would crave something interesting, something to detonate inside me and to excite me a lot. And that epiphany, I call it, like a religious revelation, or being hit over the head with a plank of wood, was in Paris. Like my first epiphany with a wine under the stars and the Hebridean skies. That was an epiphany. It was like awakening that wine was amazing. The second epiphany, the natural wine epiphany, was wine was different. This is wine in a way that the other things were just like a manufactured thing. But I was never putting one thing above another. It was always my personal preference. And being excited by something, the older you get, the more you look for these things to excite you. I'm not a sort of conservative person. I want to be challenged, and intellectually and also taste-wise. I'm much more adventurous in the way I taste. But having said that, my tastes are still quite confined. So I know what I love, and I sort of tend not to deviate too much outside of that.
Given your close relationship with natural wines, maybe before we dive into the topic, you could define for us, or maybe how you define natural wine.
Yes. So it depends what day it is and what time of the day.
Okay.
Because I was asked to do this for the diploma thing once, and it's like, I want to say it was never take me literally, because there's no law, there's no regulation that says this is the definition of natural wine. No matter how many organizations there is one in France which defines vin nature, and there's AAA in Italy, and I'm sure all around the world people are trying to define it. And I don't want to be prescriptive. I don't want to say, growers, if you don't do this, then you're outside the natural wine family. For me, it's a big family, and it's quite embracing. And think of so many growers on journeys. But for me, I would place most of the emphasis on natural wine on farming. So for me, the minimum is organic farming, and preferably further biodynamic and regenerative, because without farming the grapes, it's meaningless really. It's all about the quality of the grapes. And it's farming in harmony with nature and sympathy for the land, with respect for the environment. And in a way, trying to protect and preserve everything that nature and the vintage gives you. That's, for me, 70% of what natural wine is. And bringing it to the winery, it's about selection, like hand harvesting preferably, but selection by taste as well. Before you even start working with the grapes, what are you working with? The grapes should be clean and healthy and show that the result of fantastic farming and the result of decisions made in the vineyard during the vintage. And then always wild ferment, so fermenting with the yeast, because that is the signature of the year, and the yeast populations always change anyway, and we know that different yeasts start the ferment and end it, but that gives the characteristic identity of the wine in that year. So wild ferment is a sort of fairly non-negotiable thing, and then no chemical interventions, no additives. You can add acid or whatever, or de-acidify, you can add tannins or whatever, you can add color or whatever, nothing like that basically. It's not necessary. If the wine is good enough, the wine stands on its feet. And really, it's all about what we call like accompanying the wine to the bottle with as little intervention as possible. Physical, yes. Taste, of course. Decisions on racking the wine to another vessel, or etc., etc. These are important. And the natural wine was never made, doesn't make itself. It's a partnership between the human being and the wine, and the human being respecting nature, but also respecting what needs to be done to bring the wine to the bottle, so it's not disgusting as well. And we say on issues of like filtering and finding and sulfites is using judgment. Basically, don't filter too much, because you can do coarse filtration for the cruddy bits, but you start stripping flavor away, natural flavors, and don't worry about the appearance too much either. So fining is like, a lot of people have abandoned fining as a thing. Fair enough. Sulfites is the most controversial thing of all, because I would say I'm not adamant about it. Like, I prefer wines made without sulfites, because I think they can achieve something amazing and beautiful. But there are certain years where you just cannot work without sulfites. You need to use them, and you need to use them at the point where it's most important. So sometimes if you don't add sulfur after, I don't know, or before mallow or something like that, you get mousiness in the wine. So we don't want the wine to be spoiled. So, we're not like, we're not ideologues like that. We're idealistic in the sense that we want the purest wine that you can possibly make in the vintage. But we understand that sometimes nature and circumstance plays a role. So in a nutshell, I would say, it's organic, natural farming, bringing the wine to bottle with no chemical interventions other than a touch of sulfites maybe, but always tasting. So it's the most hands-on form of winemaking, because it's like being, I always say, it's like if you're a chef or a cook or whatever like that, you can either follow the recipe to the letter and says use X amount of salt and X amount of pepper, or you can taste and you go as you taste. And I think like a natural winemakers are empirical in the sense that is they taste and then decide what needs to be done, rather than using the winemaking manual, which enologists have been taught to do for the last 100 years. So it's going back to the basics, because all wine was natural probably from over 50 to 100 years ago. I mean, hardly anything was used, if anything. And then of course, when wine became a commodity, a product basically, to be traded, to be sold in supermarkets, to be rated by critics, to be taught on wine courses, then it had to be something that could be evaluated, it had to be consistent. But if you're making wine for yourself or your friends or your neighbours, it's like something to drink, isn't it? Something for pleasure.
So you mentioned the additives, and I always wondered, where does the fortified wine stand in this picture of the natural wines? Because we have very big additive there. It's part of the definition for the fortified wines.
Or you could also say like champagnes might not be natural,
and
because of using yeast and blending and whatever. So that's why we call them grower champagnes or biodynamic. I think those styles are still finding their way. I'm not really an expert on sort of fortified wines. I mean, interesting with sherry, there are a lot of producers now moving away from fortification to rediscovering the original sherry styles, which were non-fortified expressions of Palomino but old clones of other grapes. I mean, in that region of Andalusia, there were like 150, 200 grape varieties. They're just using one clone or one thing. And why? Because they're fortifying. And if they're fortifying, what is farming got to do with anything? Like champagne. If you're blending, you don't need farm well, which is why farming in Champagne has been considered some of the worst farming in the world, because it's just getting acid juice to build blocks of flavor using blending. But now we're much more interested in provenance and where things come from and terroir, and we want certain flavors. We want a sense of purity. So although Champagne is a process, I think a lot of growers are going towards a style, brut nature. They want a champagne to stand on its own 2 feet. If it didn't have bubbles, it would still be a delicious drink. And we're seeing that more and more with the small growers. In terms of port, I can honestly say, I mean, I guess like there's always a base wine which you consider. Champagne is less relevant. I think in port, it's more relevant, the quality of the base wine. But we don't talk about organic port very much, or biodynamic port or whatever. And the process of like adding like spirit is like taking up to, let's say, I don't know, 18 or 20%. Like it's slightly difficult to taste certain things above a certain alcohol. I find anyway, I look for less again. I like light body wines, but I acknowledge that some wines are more powerful than others because of the climate and but I don't like sort of late harvest style wines. People for like what they call super ripeness, which is a very like 80s and 90s concept, is like maximizing the fruit potential. I think the opposite should be minimizing fruit potential, because fruit is like a fat thing. I mean, we like this, looking for minerality and the gastronomic element of the wine. You want less alcohol, you want more acid, you want lower pH, you want all sorts of components in the wine, because in a way that's the more complex thing. Not the bigger the wine, the bigger the more powerful the message. It's like someone shouting at you from close up. It's not so effective. But I'm not a good one to ask about port because I don't drink it.
Okay. Well, I think when we talk about natural wine, a lot of people think it's ultra funky, orange, cloudy, often with a lot of Brett or VA. Mm-hmm. Is that really the case?
Oh, how many battles I fought on this battleground? So I mean, one of the early ones arguments was that natural wines were all full of Brett, which it was such an insane thing to say, because Brett is something, it doesn't exist in natural wine per se. Like the most Bretty wines I've ever tasted were Bordeaux from the 80s, and they were certainly not natural. And, you get Bretty vintages, and once Brett's, invaded either a vineyard or a winery, it's Bretty. It doesn't care whether you're making the wine naturally or not. I've visited a lot of natural wineries, and believe me, the people are so scrupulous about hygiene, so you're never going to get Brett in there, and they hate Brett as well. But having said all that, and this is nothing to do with it, this is an aside from natural wine, I have a really soft spot for Bretty wines from the Rhone and from Bordeaux. Not in Burgundy, weirdly, because I think Pinot Noir is too beautiful to damage like that. But sometimes I think Brett is like, it's just an accent. It's just like something that's there. And we know also from experience that certain vineyards have propensity for Brett. They present Bretty wines. And this, it's not the winery, so it's in the vineyard and it comes as the winery, and the wine eventually has Brett notes. And if you're very critical, you say, oh, that wine is Bretty. And I say, what's your point? That is the way it is, It's like, yeah, that's a granite vineyard. You're going to say that wine's granity. I mean, it's like, it's a Bretty vineyard. So that's never worried me. The cloudy bit, we're all a bit more relaxed now. I think supermarkets impose the standards of, like, if it's clear, it's clean. And I did the WSET diploma and higher and all those sort of things. It was like, and you were taught what you see is really important. Clear means good. It was almost like clear means like, cleanliness is next to godliness, they say. And I used to believe that. I used to look at a wine and think, yeah, there's no bits floating around in it. That's a good sign. And now if I see a clear wine, I think it's a bad sign, because it's a fake colour and it's been super filtered. Whereas I see a wine which is cloudy, I look at whether it's clear or cloudy, I hold it up to the light, I look at the intensity of colour. And if I see that the colour of the wine captures the light in its essence, there's something about the wine which is real and intense and inviting. So it's like appetizing. When you look at something, you think it's got depth to it. So I look for a sort of like a positive cloudiness in wine. Not just bits floating around it. I'm talking about just the sort of the natural colour of something when you look into it. It's not clear, but it's got depth to it. And that's really important to me. So I completely changed my mind about how you perceive a wine. So you said haziness, funkiness. Funkiness is sort of in the nose and the eye and the mouth of the beholder. I think a lot of natural wines were very funky in the beginning, because after all, the people didn't know what they're doing. So you can not add sulfur, but if you don't really know the result and you accept the result that comes from it, and it's like got lots of VA or sort of does this like really heavy mallowy thing and so aldehyde sort of notes, and that's what people were saying. They're describing the wine. You say, oh, well, that's sort of aldehyde, or that's like VA, or that's whatever. I'm less tolerant of this now than I used to be, but at the time I found it really exciting, because again, it's like it was not in my wine vocabulary, other than this is a wine fault. And for me, is it a fault or is it a flaw? I found it more leaning towards flaws, and flaws being interesting and faults being terminal. A fault is something like it's oxidized, you'd only pour it down the sink. It's got TCA, corktate, you'd pour it down the sink, you wouldn't even cook with it. But VA and Brett and, aldehyde nature or oxidation, it's slightly subjective. And actually, I've got quite a good story about the very first wine fair before the real wine fair. It was called the Natural Wine Fair. And I was doing a masterclass with a bunch of sommeliers, and this woman who was an MW, who shall be nameless, came in and said, oh, I've just been out there and tasted all the wines. And she asked the question. She asked the question. She made a statement. All the wines out there are oxidized. And I thought, like, what is she talking about? And I tried to think, what is she, I was trying to visualize which wines might be oxidized. And she said, all of them. And I said, I'm not sure what your question is, not that it's a question. Do you actually mean that some are made in an oxidative style? And he said, no, they're oxidized. I said, no, they're not oxidized. You're an MW, you should understand that oxidative winemaking, not topping up barrels leads to, flaw. I mean, I don't need to tell you, how wine is made, but I thought it was a shocking admission that wine was either good or bad. And in my world, it never was. It was just like lots of shades of grey or orange, lots of shades of orange, actually. And oxidation is like a winemaker's tool, like reductive winemaking, like working without oxygen gives reductive character. You don't say the wine is faulty because it's reductive. And oxidative is some of the most wonderful wines in the world are oxidative. I mean, some of the great champagnes, some of the great Loire whites, some of the great white Riojas. I mean, if they weren't oxidative, they wouldn't be great. And I was shocked, like, how close the established world was to wines, because they were so concerned about deconstructing natural wines for their faults that they couldn't see the truth in front of them, which is like wine is way more complex than human beings can measure, because it's a result of so many, yes, chemical reactions, yes, microbiological actions, yes, the effect of nature, yes, the decisions of the winemaker, but yes, also your personal taste, whether you like it or not. The wine is the wine is the wine. And there are a few wine faults that are measurable and quantifiable. And yes, you can chuck the wine down the sink, but the vast majority are, as I say, shades of grey. It's more a matter of opinion, which is why I may not agree with, 90% of the wine establishment at the time. But whereas it used to worry me, it doesn't anymore, I think, because I just think we agree to differ about taste. And I know that take 100 people, you get 100 different tastes and 100 different interpretations of exactly the same wine. But if the wine is meant to be this microbiological chemical thing, how can we have 100 different tastes about it? It's like, if it's a product, then a product has a defined purpose in its life. But that's why wine isn't a product, it's a living thing. It's capable of inspiring people to write, wonderful things about it, or to feel deeply emotional about it. And we forget emotion when we're tasting. And natural wines, for me, they were like the short circuit to my emotions as well, because they made me feel things about wine that classic conventional wines didn't. I could admire a conventional wine. I could admire a cathedral, but I wouldn't want to live in it. So I could admire the structure, the building work behind it, but this is not me. This doesn't reflect what I need in my existence.
I want to move towards more controversial part of the natural wines as well. So I would be interesting to hear your thoughts and your opinion. So coming back to the wine bar that you owned, which was called Terroir, you mentioned.
Yes.
Many actually argue that some of these elements found in natural wines, such as Brett, such as VA, such as even mousiness, actually hides or overpowers the terroir. And yet you named the bar Terroir, which was the natural wine bar. So what are your thoughts here?
Well, yes, that's a very good question, because it reveals a tension between two things. One, the making of the wine. So we always said that natural wine shouldn't hide terroir origin. Now, one of my things was that conventional winemaking does, because it's very difficult to taste terroir when you can taste sulfur or oak, like new oak, for example. And sort of in natural winemaking, some wine fairs, they eschew wines which have new oak. You're not allowed to have new oak. You're not allowed to have certain sort of winemaking techniques like, micro-oxygenation or whatever. Because in a way, it's human beings compensating for what nature sort of couldn't give the wine, basically. It was usually compensate for bad farming, if we're honest. So all the elements we were talking about, like the faults, like in terroir. So when I did the list, I had a symbol which I put next to particularly weird wines, or wines that I thought might upset people if they weren't too certain. And it was the symbol of a horse. The horse, I had two ideas about it, because like a lot of wines were made from biodynamic vineyards where they used like animal traction, like horses do, whatever. But my idea of the horse was like wines that smell like horse manure. And that was like, it was to alert people that if they didn't like Brett in wines, that this wine would smell Bretty, like manure, to put it like kindly. And although I quite like that style, and there are some people who quite like that style. Look, I grew up with Chateau de Beaucastel in the 1980s. That was the definition of horse manure in wine, and I loved it. And it's what made sort of the wine great. The VA thing, I tried to think that we just didn't put wines on a list because they were natural. And interestingly, we are one company. We were the first company probably to specialize heavily in natural wines, but along came others, and it's the taste of the buyer that is really most significant. So with some wine companies, I taste the wines and I think, yeah, they're really great. And others, I think like, how on earth are they selling these wines? Because the levels of VA are like off the scale. So what I'm comfortable with is my particular thing. We have 6 buyers that they come to print, and our tastes tend to be aligned because we taste a lot with each other, and we have a tolerance for things which wine faults or flaws, which is on the medium side. So, occasionally we'll allow something in, but on the whole, we're quite particular because we also understand that it's not pleasurable to taste wines or to drink wines that are quite extreme. So Terroir probably had more extreme wines when it opened because in 2008, winemakers didn't really know what they were doing. So if they got it right, they got it amazingly right. But if they got it wrong, the wines were just weird. And if we were to do a terroir now, what were there then? I think there were about probably 300 natural producers in the world. Maybe there were less. Maybe there were 150 or 200. Now, according to Raisin App, there's like 3,000. I think, where did they come from? Have I been asleep for the last 10 years? And that will embrace a lot of different styles. And some of them will be total extremists. There'll be 0-0 and the wines will be horrible. Or there'll be 0-0 and the wines will be amazing. And so there'll be 3,000 different producers making different wines in different countries. And even in their portfolio, the wines will be different from vintage to vintage. So we don't know. And that's the way we buy as well. It's like, we taste all the wines from producers, say, yeah, we took that cuvee last year, but this year we won't take it, but we'll take this one instead. Okay. So I think if you're, being open-minded is also, you can be critical at the same time, because in the end, that someone has to drink the wine. And the biggest fallacy about propagated by people who are anti-natural wine was that it's a con on like the consumer. Of course it isn't. No one has to drink this stuff, and if no one drinks it, it will fail. But the fact that more and more people drank it, not because it was hip or trendy, they probably investigated natural wines because it had a nice image and it was fun, it was unpretentious. But I'm sure if they were drinking vinegar, they would have let us know, really, because I treat customers as grown-ups and not as consumers. Customers have individual, taste buds and a palate and a freedom of choice. But wine writers, I'm afraid to say, and supermarket buyers treat wine as a product and customers as consumers of a product, and as welcoming consistency above all that else. And that's the way I was taught, at the WSCT, is like consistency is really important to be able to identify things. And now I realize that perhaps the opposite is true. In fact, the most charming thing is not knowing. The most charming thing is that wine is mutable, it's alive, et cetera, and I can't always define it, but I do know whether it gives me pleasure or not.
But I kind of like to push it, and
yes. Go.
And so you are also one of the people behind the wine fair called the Real Wine Fair.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, with the focus on natural wine, why it is not called natural? Is it because of the negativity sometimes associated with the natural wine, or maybe because the fair is actually much bigger and beyond that?
Yeah, I think both. I mean, we had a fair called the Natural Wine Fair. I wouldn't say it was 100% natural. I don't mind it. I'm used the word natural a lot, but I know it's a very emotive term because it implies that wines which are not natural are unnatural. But that's not the truth. It's not the truth. It's not the opposite. For me, it's wines which are denatured by process. That's the opposite of natural. So I think a lot of wines are what I call towards natural, but calling it towards natural doesn't make any sense at all. So I try to think, and there wasn't, they at the same time raw sort of like formed as well. But wines are not raw, but it's a catchy thing. And I thought, well, what about real? And real is, you know what I thought? I was just drinking wine one day, and I thought, you know what? This is wine. Like, this is real in the sense that it feels like a real product of nature. And I thought that real wine is, it's real. But I got criticized a lot when I came up with the name, because it sounds like really pretentious. And someone said it reminded them of fascism. And I said, there's the opposite of that. It's about, identity. It's about real identity. We don't tell anyone what to do. We don't, unlike other wine fairs, we didn't create a manifesto and say you must be below, 65 grams total sulfites. We said, we know how you work. We trust you. If you don't work that way, then, don't be part of it. But, we didn't want to prescribe. But also we recognize that some people are at the beginning of the journey. They were farming organically. They were making wine with, native yeast, but they were adding quite high levels of sulfur. Just say, come to the fair, show your wines, taste other wines from your peers, and decide which direction you want to go in. I mean, we didn't want to do that too much, but there's so many growers that, making wines in the way we liked. Yeah, I think that's why Real, I think Real was probably, of all the wine fairs that I think about, and it was one of the earliest, you have to remember, is that it was a more tolerant wine fair. And unlike a lot of wine fairs, there wasn't the sense of this is a club of friends getting together and excluding other people. And what really annoyed me about, I heard about other wine fairs that just excluded people on the basis of rumor. This grower doesn't like that grower, so we can't invite them, and so on and so forth. I didn't care about that. Basically, the winemakers are frail human beings, whatever. But we did say look, you know what real and natural is. So we want you to be as close towards natural as you possibly can. But we understand that this year you had to add an extra 30 parts per million of sulfites. It was a crazy year. We understand that, but don't submit wines. We trust growers. Don't submit wines if you don't feel they qualify. But we're not going to hold you to it. We're not going to hold a gun to your head and say, is it natural?
I like that trust relationship with winemakers. I think that's very important. I promise this is the last question that is kind of pushing you to the kind of explaining the natural wine. But for me, at least, it's always been very important, because sometimes we communicate about natural things, not only wine, but all things, as they are being better. And I have an issue with that, because forests are filled with naturally growing mushrooms, some of them some most poisonous mushrooms in the world. So I think, should we also educate people of certain risks that could be linked, for example, also with natural wines, like biogenic amines, when the lactic acid bacteria works in a stressful environment and, kind of produces maybe elements that are not good in the wine. Yeah. So is that too much?
Well, I don't know. I have to say, I haven't really sort of thought about the sort of health implications. For me, I have a sort of more overarching agenda. And it goes back to the farming side. I strongly believe this planet is doomed if we don't change our habits, and that means our consumption habits. Towards products that come from regenerative farmed, places. So rather than industrial farming using so much of the earth's resources, we need to sort of favor small producers who produce enough to live on, but not obviously not too much, put back as much as they take out. So the farming comes first with me. Wine is a product. So I always say this, basically, the world does not need wine, if it all push came to shove and it meant destroying land or rewilding or whatever, we don't need wine. I know a lot of people would lose their jobs, but this is we're talking about the future and the planet we leave to our children. But I think conscientious farming is fine, and actually not only fine, but regenerative farming, it could be the solution to climate change. So that's the main thing. On the processing, on the making of wine, it's a subjective issue. I don't think there's anything like toxic in wine. I mean, you talk about mushrooms, but mushrooms are not grown; they're in the wild. So it's I mean, some mushrooms are obviously farmed and whatever. But think about so many things we have in our lives, like sourdough bread culture, like wild yeast culture, or real ale, or craft beer as it's now called, or unpasteurized cheese. Yes, okay, yeah, you can eat unpasteurized cheese and have a reaction to it, but there's no doubt in terms of like flavor and whatever, and
which cheese is better. We know that.
Yes, exactly. It's cheese basically, and some people can eat it and some people just can't. They have an allergic reaction, and the same with wine. Some people are have an antihistamine reaction to wine, and for me, there's a big argument, and it's not clear about sulfites. I believe that they're present in such small quantities that people who complain about allergenic reactions to wine say, I'm allergic to sulfites. I don't think it is the sulfites, but I think it's the combination of sulfur with 50 unknown ingredients, additives. As human beings, I think we are not meant to ingest this toxic potion, which is amplified by wine. And I know my body immediately rebels. Like if I have a really sulfury, richly additive, and I haven't had for ages, but I remember putting some wine in my mouth and literally my whole skin crawled. And I thought, like, this is my body telling me not to go any further with this. Yeah. Same with beer, which has loads of additives as well. So anything which is like more real, for the want of the better word, or more natural, my body feels comfortable with, because it feels like this is the right thing. It feels like there's a harmony there. But anything which is like overly confected, I feel like, I don't want to have it inside me. I'm more beginning to think what's inside of me and what's it doing to me. I'm not paranoid about it, but it's, I think actually the brain starts worrying about it. And when the brain starts worrying about it, it communicates to the body. So it almost creates an allergenic reaction, whether it's physical or not. It could be psychological, this reaction. But I think in terms of the way things are going, and people read the ingredients on packets and whatever. People are obsessed now with what's put into stuff. But wine has been the last one to hold out. So wine just say contains sulfites. It could be like I don't know, 2 milligrams or like 210. But it's quite different. And then it's contains like now there'll be like barcodes which you'll be able to scan and for the ingredients added to your wine. I mean, it's a nonsense. We should just like insist that people make wine in a low intervention way and not put anything like in it. But then that's not the way the world moves at the moment. And wine is still, as I say, still product. And supermarkets have enormous power in the way that wine is produced, and governments do, and bureaucracies do, and whatever. So natural wine has always been the sort of like the outlier, this sort of like almost like the artist who goes against the culture of the sort of like what's going on in the world. And so but we're getting there. I mean, I would have said like 10 years ago we weren't even a drop in the ocean, and now we're like we're a puddle. We're a sizable puddle and growing bigger every year, because the younger generation, they don't have the certainties that I grew up with. So they're open to new ideas and new tastes and new flavors. And they really care about, they tend to care more about the planet as well, because, they're thinking about the future, whereas, maybe some of us are not. Yeah.
Remembering what you said, that the natural wine is becoming kind of, now we have know-how and it's becoming cleaner, let's say. I also noticed that there are actually quite a lot of natural wines that I taste in the blind tasting. I would not know, because they are clean, they're pure, they're not fine, they're not filtered, but they're just so amazingly beautiful.
Yeah.
And I was thinking maybe what other trends you have seen in the natural wine scene lately. Where are the natural wine scene going?
Yes, it's strange. Actually, yeah, they're almost what I call straight wines, and that makes them sound so boring. But it's almost like natural wine is like is angling to be a bit more conventional in feel, in the sense of like when you taste it, you taste like there's more minimalism in the wine. So like rather than the funkiness and all the edges and like all the sort of weirdy wavy bits, it's like I think there's a generation of winemakers who try to make what are called linear wines that just describe a sharp line in your, so they don't fatten out in the mouth. I'm not saying everyone does this, but I'm saying that I think this is the taste. I went to Austria one year, to Burgenland, and every winery I visited had had a shelf with all the bottles of wine that they drank on the shelf, and they were all white wines from the Jura, basically. But they weren't making, this is a red wine country, they're making robust, Blaufränkischweigel, Saint-Cloud, 14% from warm climate. But they were drinking, chalky, minerally Chardonnays and Sauvignons. And then you visit them 2 years later, you think, your wines have totally changed. You're still making natural wines, actually, if anything, more natural, but they're really self-effacing, delicate, pretty, more whites being made, because this is what they like to drink. And you always make, in the end, when you've finished all your experimentation, and I think a lot of producers start by trying different styles. They tried the glue style, making Beaujolais style, juicy, no sulfur wines. They get bored of that because there's no, you can make it without sulfur because you have carbon dioxide instead, but where's the terroir, Where's the edge? They want the wines with the edge and snappiness and sapidity and saltiness. The one tasting term that has come in the last 10 years, I would submit more than any other, is salinity or saltiness. And it's what we call or minerality is, and wine professionals hate it because it's you can't describe it. When you say, minerality, you mean stoniness. I said, yeah, but that's the impression it gives in the mouth. I'm not saying I'm tasting stones, but it's it's extraordinary. That is your abiding impression, not strawberries and blackberries and whatever, but stones and salt, with these other accents. And actually, even now in professional tasting, we're seeing these as the fundamental terms. The difference between a great wine is and an okay wine is, one wine is strawberries and blackberries, and one is strawberries and blackberries, salt and stones. So you're adding this dimension, the structural dimension of minerality, and in a way that's can only be captured, I think, in low intervention winemaking, because as soon as you add a lot of sulfur into the wine and oak or other sort of tricks and winemakers' tropes, you lose all this. You lose the sort of essence, the energy and the dynamism of the wine. And the other thing is, I've probably mentioned this word a few times, and it's a very vague word, is energy. Is I know wine is real. What I know, the wine has got energy in it. And I know the wine has energy when I put it in my mouth and I feel it living. I feel it wants to move of its own accord. I don't have to work it. It's working itself. And it's an intangible, but for me, it differentiates an okay wine with a superb wine, because it's I want to know the wine more. But also I want to be less in the wine's face. I want to be the passive taker in of all this force of the wine, and it makes me go on a journey. And I think the greatest wines do that, and the greatest wines I've tasted probably in my life have been natural wines, because they have this energy. They take my mind to a different place, and they make me reevaluate my sense of taste. And I'm not trying to taste a particular element in the wine. I'm tasting the whole thing at once in a round, and it's amazing.
I think that's very important when we talk about natural wines, because sometimes people just pick one thing and then dissect it, and either it's fault or it's flaw, and then kind of focus on it. But you have to look at wine in the whole picture, kind of step aside or step back and take a look at the picture. I think that's important.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And wine isn't about ticking the boxes. I remember I was for a few years invited as a judge on the Decanter World Wine Awards, and I sat in a panel, and it was the people who obviously done courses, they wrote beautiful tasting notes in the sense is they could write 5 pages on the bland, I don't know, Côte de Gascon. I mean, $2.99 wine. And I'm thinking cold fermentation, lemon sherbet, that's it, and if I could even write that much, I was quite pleased with myself. There's nothing to say about these wines because they're sort of industrial, but the habit of mind to describe, to pick apart everything is a sort of habit of mind of a professional. Jean-Pierre Frick, the brilliant Alsatian vigneron and like biodynamics, but also like a real poet of wine, talked about different sort of taster. And there's the person who's like the vertical taster, and the person who basically tastes in the round or tastes through their scent on the pulse, in their sense of feeling. And their sense of feeling guides them. And often they're complete amateurs, but they have an amazing sense of taste because they taste almost in 3 dimensions in ways that professionals don't. Professionals are both supposed to find out the essential truth of something through picking the wine apart into all its component bits and sticking it together in a sort of with a summary at the end, an assessment. The amateur doesn't do that. The amateur is enchanted by the color or the smell, and they're trying to articulate feelings about wine, and sometimes they come up with an amazing truth about something. They don't know how they did it, but the wine has inspired them because they're there to learn and to feel and to absorb and not to judge. And for me, that's a very important thing. And I think if you're really into natural wines, you sort of allow that process to happen. So when professionals have to unlearn a lot, I mean, I did the courses. So, I did unlearn in a very short space of time all the disciplines that may be a different sort of taster to one who is much more emotive, I think, and spontaneous, a bit like the wines, I guess.
This is the last question, and I usually ask this to everyone, and I think we have done a lot of things already during our conversation, but still I would like to ask you, what is the one wine myth you would like to debunk?
There's so many.
We could write a book quickly.
Yeah. I mean,
well, maybe you should write a book.
I mean, we covered a few things, one of them was someone who should know better said all natural wines are funky, and I asked him, how many have you tasted? Well, he said, I tasted one with Brett the other day. And I said, and what else? It's like, well, I don't drink natural wines, so how are they all funky? It's like, I speak as a person who when I did my English essays at university, they were picked apart. If I made a statement without proof, then it was like, yeah, it's rubbish, so you have to justify yourself. So I think the problem is the wine world is divided. There are so many vested interests. It's been very hierarchical, judging wines by quality, by premier cru, by the village, by the name of the state, whatever. But imagine a wine world where none of this existed. Everything existed on its own merits. It'd be frightening, wouldn't it? That a natural wine could be as expensive as a first grade claret, because in a way, what's the quality difference we're talking about? It's just like tradition and judging and points from arbitrary judges, So I think the whole judging system is a nonsense, and marking wines is a nonsense. I think cru system is a nonsense. I think appellation system is a nonsense. Particularly in the natural wine world, where a lot of our friendly French growers have fallen foul of appellation. Why? Because they, in a way, perversely, they try to defend the whole tradition of winemaking in the region. They try to defend indigenous grapes. They try to defend terroir. They try to defend all these things, but their wines are considered atypical because if you defend appellation, you want to say, I can advertise appellation because these 700 growers all make wines that taste exactly the same. What about the person who makes the wines that taste really individual, of the vineyard, et cetera, et cetera? So, some I think in the mythology, the myths that need to be busted is that almost like everything you learn, it's like I was taught in university, everything you learn in university, you will unlearn in real life. And I think that's true in wine. Everything I learned in wine school or, in reading and studying wine, I've since unlearned. It's not that everything is incorrect or rubbish, and it's a really good basis to start from because you need ground knowledge. But pretty well, everything is a matter of opinion, but a lot of things are wrong because a lot of things don't take account of the most important things in life. Like I said earlier about the earth, the planet, farming. It's always seen as a moral positive. I want people, if I come out with one thing, is that wine is way more than chemistry. It's way more than a process. Yes, it's a transformation of grapes into wine. But what is wine? Wine has, 8,000 years of culture, at least, as far as we know. But, wine is binding society together. Wine is celebration. Wine is like, it moves people to write poetry or do painting or create music or whatever. So in a way, to take it out of this, take it out of the bottle and put it into our minds and our hearts and make it a much more exciting subject. So yeah, that's my more political point. I would always probably end on that, because in a way, when we talk about natural wine, we talk about conventional wine, it's like we're talking about like two areas of wine that are at war with each other. And philosophically, they're the opposite ends of the spectrum. But surely wine should be sort of like a unifying thing. It shouldn't be like, we shouldn't talk about the politics as if they're different. Wine should always be helping people to come together rather than pushing them apart.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think the last sentence, that's something we should put on the book you will write.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't ask me to repeat it, 'cause I already forgotten.
Yeah. So there's a small token from us and the No Sediment team.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for inviting us into your home.
Well, thank you for
thank you for spending time with us in this beautiful weather today, when actually we could be.
Yes, finally we got spring after like the longest winter I can remember. It wasn't even winter. It was like nothing. It was like having a very long autumn.
Yes, and that's important thing to remember because I really liked your definition about natural wine, because you said the number one thing is how we farm the vineyards. And now when I drive around and I see bare ground, it just frightens me.
Yeah.
I want to see cover crop, permanent cover crop. I want to see what you say, the regenerative viticulture more.
Did you ever see a movie called it's called Natural Resistance? It had another name in Italian. So it's directed by someone I know very well called Jonathan Noster, who did Mondovino in 2004. And so Natural Resistance focused on 4 producers in Italy, Stefano Bellotti, someone from Tuscany, someone from the Marche, and someone else. I can't remember who the other person was. Someone from Emilia Romagna. And it was basically, Jonathan is like made films in the 60s, 70s, 80s, still making films actually, quite sort of art house cinema, and but he's always been interested in wine and farming, and he came into natural wine quite late after Mondovino, which is about sort of like, big producers, people like Parker and Mondavi on the one side, and like these small producers on the other. Anyway, so he sort of returned to the subject, and then basically he just interviews these people, and the natural wine lifestyle it's hard work, but it's a beautiful lifestyle, like it's a really happy families, blah, blah, blah. And he goes and visits Stefano Bellotti, who was the first guy who he put natural wine on the map in Italy in the 1980s. He's the first AAA guy, biodynamics, no additions to the wine. So he's like a communist and blah blah blah, and he's constantly threatened by the appellation. So he lost the appellation one year for one of his wines because he planted peach trees in the vineyard, and it's illegal to have fruit and grapes growing in the same whatever. Even though it's like, it's a sort of culture that used to take place for hundreds of years, mixed farming, you plant everything together.
Sure.
It's like, that's the way the world rolls. And it's like, so he lost the appellation. He had labeled the wine, he lost the appellation. It cost him 40,000 euros to change the labels, and that his winery only makes 450,000 euros. That's like a tenth just for one thing. And he said, like, every time a car drives up, I feel that's the end. It's the final, like, nail in my coffin. Anyway, there's this bit where he walks up the hill. No, he's talking about appellation. He said, like, he said it's a nonsense, because, like, if you look at sommelier descriptions of wine, he said, like, of Cortese, which is the grape that he is, it's exactly the same as that guy 700 kilometers down the road who makes Radicchio. It's like Lye Blossom or almond. It's like it's meaningless, like it's nothing about the place. And so we're in his vineyard, and it's like wild straggly vines, and he said, like, this is my vineyard. He's got the spade. He said, this is the soil, it's alive, and he sticks a spade in the soil. He turns it up, like, and this happens a lot in biodynamic vineyards when you go. He said, look at it, like, you know, and it's like dark earth. It's almost like brownish black. And he said, picks up like a handful of it. And he said, smell it, sweet, you know, like sweet smell of like, you know, hummus, you know, like this is like the thing that's sort of like, this is where the vines are living, you know, putting their feet in here and then further down and further down. And he said, like, and it's really sort of like friable. So it's like, you know, really porous. So there's loads of microorganisms. He said, there's my neighbour's land. He said, you won't mind me doing this. So they walk across the road and there's nothing growing. There's no sort of, you know, no cover crops, no grass. He said, look, it's like, look at the soil. It's like, look, and look there, detergent, basically. It's like grey. And he said, oh, I can't even get the spade in here. It's like rock hard, the ground, basically. So what's that?
It's compacted.
Yeah, because of the chemicals. So basically, the roots haven't penetrated, so they're at the surface, and because they're at the surface, they need more chemicals. So just like this like constant chemical abuse, and you look at it, and he's got like, on one hand he's got his soil, on the other hand he's got this like, looks like a brick, or like a grey, and he said life, death, basically. It's a very poignant moment, I think, the whole thing, because if you go to an organic or biodynamic farm, they always dig up like a little thing and say, let's smell that, it's like wonderful. And I think, yeah, that's like life. And you know, natural wine is about, you know, there's life and energy, and nothing can. There's a quote from King Lear in Shakespeare: "Nothing can come of nothing." I feel that with these dead farms, and they're horrible places because there's no wildlife, there's no bird song, no bugs, no nothing happening. What good can come of that, really? And what is really wrong to be farming that way for the environment? And there's a great thing at the moment, like a debate about in England about putting like pesticides and fungicides and all these things. And farmers saying, no, it's really important. We need to do it because, you know, the yields will be too low and like da-da-da-da. It's like, my God, you don't care, do you, basically? We're overproducing anyway.
I was going to say, we are overproducing.
We're way overproducing, and we don't need that. We need to work in a totally different way. But the mindset is always either or, which is, you know, the same with organic and natural. It's like, oh, you're over on that side, the far end of the spectrum. You know, this is the mainstream. But the mainstream should never be the mainstream. It should be the wrong stream, basically. And I feel that the more I hear about the secrets, people always tell me, like, oh, I shouldn't tell you this, but you know, this is what happens in wineries and in vineyards. I thought, like, I never knew. I thought that most wine was sort of natural, and then some people put a little bit of additives in it, and I never realized what an abusive regime it is. Yeah. And I don't know whether it's getting better or worse. That's the thing. It's like, I think, like, you know, if you work in this world, everyone always says the best is for the best, you know, in all possible worlds, like Voltaire said. You know, always for the best and the best of all possible worlds. And I seriously don't have enough faith in people anymore. I used to trust that people were doing what they said, or that, you know, like, oh, it's not so bad, conventional. It's just like, you know, it wouldn't be too difficult to convert to organic. But the people who really, like, you know, concerned about organic say, no, it's not that easy. Like, you know, you think you can convert? You can get organic certification after 3 years if you've been working chemically. They said, but in reality, it should be 10, you know, because the soil takes that long to recover, a whole cycle.
Yeah.
Like a generation to recover it, it's sort of whatever. And you still have to nurture it like it was like a child, like, you know, and feed it, you know, with the right sort of nutrients to keep it sort of alive. And then it's all right if you never worked with chemicals, you know, it's on virgin pasture or whatever. And then I think you have obviously an advantage, and you can go straight to biodynamics or straight to regenerative. But, you know, it's it's a hot topic. And the Real Wine Fair, we got, I think one of the seminars is going to be on, it's going to be part hybrids and part regenerative farming, because regenerative is like the hot topic. It's about, what am I doing? Am I making wine here, or am I farming for a reason, to help the community, to help the land? And it's about bringing back life, you know, to the land. And grapes are a byproduct, but they're not the most important part of the project. It's just something that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we didn't touch the hybrid part, which I think I agree with you. It's a very hot topic right now.
I mean, we work with this winery in Buckinghamshire, and they planted peewees, they're sort of German sort of things. And he said, like, it's like, this is like 3 years ago, and as well as, Pinot and Chardonnay. And he said he's not had to spray the peewees at all. And another producer we work with in Vermont, they only have hybrids in Vermont because it's too extreme a climate, it's too cold to grow Vitis vinifera. And within like 10 years, I'm already seen a massive terroir differentiation between our vineyards, and these hybrids are producing world-class wines. So I want to like discuss what is world-class, and it's about, is it the person who arbitrates it? Like, is it Robert Barker saying it's world-class, therefore, because I say it is, or is it like people drinking it and say, wow, that's so delicious? And Deirdre's wines are, she's voted actually one of the top 5 winemakers in the world in Wine Enthusiast. The others being someone at Shadow Marco, someone at Shadow Little. She didn't win, but it's still pretty amazing.
It's impressive.
Because the wines are incredible. But totally natural. She uses like glass demijohns that size to ferment it. She does it in the kitchen almost. It really is. But she's like a witch in the vineyard. She's the way she communicates with nature, the way she touches the vines. You see it, the way she prunes is incredible. It's like, she has an instinct for stuff. And I think that communicates itself in the wine. And it doesn't matter whether she's using La Crescent or Frontenac Noir or whatever the grapes are called. And with their crazy origin and their crosses of crosses of crosses of crosses, and they become these hybrids. They're delicious because that, but also the biodynamic or regenerative farming, it just like, I don't know, somehow it gets into the wine, that sort of sense of place, and you taste and smell all sorts of things in the wine that's just amazing. And the other thing I wanted to do was but I decided not to do, because we also sell like artisan ciders, which are like natural. And they sort of remind me of wine, and they're very vinous. And one of the things that people used to say about natural wine is, oh, it tastes a bit like cider. And that was all, the thing when you're saying like funky, cider. That was the biggest thing I ever said. I said, yeah, I like cider a lot. Anyways, particularly natural cider. And the more I taste these ciders, the more they remind me of wines. They have the same tannic structure. They have the same sort of development in the mouth, and they could be wines. And then, like they're £5 or £6 as opposed to like, I don't know, £25 for a natural wine or something like that. No one buys them because they're cider. They're not good because they're from apples. I said, what made grapes so good? What made Cabernet Sauvignons a great? It doesn't have any property in itself. There are like 1,000 varieties of apples in England alone. Just think of what you can do with that. But think of like if they're wild or they're, and the processing is so similar to winemaking. But the snobbery around cider is just ridiculous.
I did not know that because I love cider as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And did not know that it has a kind of bad rep around it.
Yeah, it's because I think like when you think of cider, you think of the commercial stuff. So
Probably.
So now I think 90% of commercial cider doesn't have apples. So it has like apple flavoring. So
Sad.
The old-fashioned way of making cider, and there's like very old-fashioned way, like what I call like almost bootleg cider, people doing it in their bathtub type thing. But then this is a guy who came from a wine background, was fascinated by pomology, it's called, like it's like viticulture for whatever. So they use organic, local fruit. Each apple has a different, each apple variety has a totally different sort of like, not just flavor, but texture. And like some are eating apples and some are, dessert apples and some are whatever. So you can make ciders which are as complex as wines. It's just that the connotation of the word cider is not, it does not have a noble connotation, whereas wine has a sort of sense of, well, there's 8,000 years, even though we might talk about it, or you can sell a bottle of wine for £1,000, certain bottles of wine, but cider will never be more than like £10. And like, it can't be good if it's so cheap, but that's a very strange way of looking at things, that it can't be good because it's inexpensive. But the processing can be as well. I mean, like we're still getting like ciders from 2019 and 20, from 23 of most of our wines. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the, like critics of natural wine. if you say, I just want to ask you a question for a change, and it would be like, do you eat sourdough bread? I mean, do you eat like supermarket white spongy bread, or do you eat properly baked, whatever, full of nutrition and goodness, but always irregular? Like, if you go to sourdough, even have a sourdough culture, which we do, it's like every time we make it's never the same, ever is the same. Depends on atmospheric conditions and how long it's been rising for, or whatever. The same with cider. I can't really use the argument because people don't know about cider, beer, but most people would drink, do you like cheap tinned lager, which is cold, filtered 1,000 times, or do you like sort of more, Artisan, beer? And pretty well everyone has, on cheese, of course, the main thing. So everyone understands cheese. Do you like this cheese spread you buy in the supermarket? It comes out of a toothpaste thing, or do you prefer like an unpasteurized blue cheese which has been maturing in a cellar for 2 years? And same with food. And do you prefer wild things which are wild, like game, or do you prefer sort of like et cetera? And and the more like you taste in terms of food, in terms of vegetables as well, it's not like the biggest, fattest things are the best. Usually, it's the smallest. It's the smallest vegetables and the fruit packed with the flavor. And it's the things that you dig up, or you pick up wild and eat. Everything. These are things that are the most delicious, packed with natural flavor and goodness. And then, we're not allowed to do that with natural wines because it's in a bottle. For goodness' sake, it's like they can't be natural if you put it in a bottle. But people object to the fact because they think that wine should be processed. Should be like homogenized, pasteurized. And these are people who will eat unpasteurized cheese, but they won't eat drink unpasteurized wine. I think bizarre that people can cope with one thing and not with the other.
It is bizarre, yeah.
But then they're not studying cheese, and they're not studying cider, and they're not they're not thinking about this as the same thing. But if I teach, but I mean, like, if I do like a wine dinner or wine event, and I can see these people have no reference for wine, so any language or experience that I use is, even if I try to bring it down to a certain level, it's probably too difficult to understand conceptually. I always make the parallel with food because everyone eats and everyone has, knows about, the choices when you go into a shop, do I want the organic one, or do I want the one which is made in this way? And then they understand it. It's amazing when you give them parallels from their own lives and choices to make. But wine is never a choice. Wine is always like, this is what I buy in the supermarket. I buy because of the price. It must be, $7.99 or $4.99 or whatever. And then the other thing I say is, and this only slightly pertains to natural wine, but I said, what do you spend on a bottle of wine? They'll say £6 or £7. I said, really? I said, you know how much wine is in there? And they said, well, £6. And I said, no, 30 pence. Because tax, importation, duty, there's like all these things, glass, labelling, etc. 30p's worth of wine. You know how much is in a £10 bottle? I know how much. And it said like £3. You know how much in a £20 bottle of wine? £12, basically. So I said, which is the value? And they look confused because it's like, I don't want to spend that much on a bottle of wine still. But I said, but 30p, it's like, do you know, like, there are wines in Anjou in France which are cheaper than bottled water, and they get the appellation, which is why, like, there was a big case by this guy. He got disqualified from the appellation making natural wines, and he said, like, you can buy like bottled water too. Yeah. Mine's a proper, like a proper wine. Like, I've gone through all this process through it. So it's I think it's. That's the part of it. That's the sort of education. I want people to spend more money, not because things are more expensive, but because they'll get a better experience. And once you calibrate your palate, it's like me with my epiphany in Paris. Life is never the same, I mean, you just like discover some really beautiful things. And also, you discover like this vocabulary. I think you use the word beauty and things like that. I strongly believe that, it's like art as well. Or music. You listen to something. I listened to a band. I went to a concert a couple of days ago. Band I never heard of. I had no expectations. It's like Danish folk metal, black metal, folk black metal. It was like brilliant, absolutely brilliant. She had a heavenly voice, amazing vocalist, and it's really sweet melodic folk songs, and then suddenly into black metal, quite melodic black metal. But it was like amazing, and I thought that this is beautiful, and I actually thought the word beautiful, and I think sometimes it's a wine, and I think this is a beautiful thing, like, and it's experience, and most people, I guess, drink wine as fuel, like it's alcohol for them, and get drunk, and the more the merrier. And I guess I'd love people to consider more what's in the glass and on the plate and whatever, because I'm sure there's more pleasure to be had, just by stopping and looking and listening and tasting. Like when we walk down the street, we try to get from A to B as quickly as possible, but actually sometimes it's a beautiful day. You just want to absorb the surrounding, and you feel happier for taking that extra time. And I think choosing the better wine and enjoying it in the right frame of mind, you get so much more out of it. It's not just whenever. I mean, speaking as someone who also occasionally needs refreshments, and just like, so I don't even want to taste it, I just want to drink it. And if I can just drink it without even thinking about it, it's the best wine sometimes.
Yeah,
it's effortless.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah. Well, I think we have finished on such a beautiful, we finished and we started again, on such a beautiful note. And thank you for telling us and introducing us. And maybe I hope that some people will taste natural wine and maybe pay more attention to it and understand that it comes in like a lot of like huge spectrum, not only, one way they kind of don't like.
Well, the great wine personality, sommelier, writer, Pascaline Lepelletier, I think said, tell me who you are and I'll find a natural wine for you. There's a natural wine for every single taste, whether you're super conventional to out and out crazy funky. And it's true. It's like you can match the wines with strong personalities to people with their personalities. So yes, everyone will find something. They just need to be what Jean-Pierre Frick said, they need to be explorers, and we need to be explorers through our lives. Otherwise, you just get bored with, it's just like, if you study it, then it becomes a boring subject. If you're not open-minded, and if you taste it to, just for alcohol, then it's like, well, you're not really tasting it, are you? Because it's the process of so many things, even like conventional wine. There's so much goes into it, in terms of the, it's a year or 2 years or 3 years to make that glass of wine you've got in your hand. It's just like, and then you tell something, you don't really think about it. But like, I guess like when it's natural wine, I want like people to think, well, I don't want people to sort of think about farming or necessarily, but I want people to feel that it comes from a good place. It's like, It feels like I think maybe a friend of this one is that wine used to be considered as food, as nourishment, and as a part of your diet, like to drink something nourishing that makes you feel good in your soul and in your body is the best thing about it. Yeah, in a simplistic way.
Yeah, perfect.